They say some names were never meant to be spoken again. Yet here you are, hearing one whispered from the dust, Moses. Not the prophet, not the deliverer of men, but the one who killed his master and inherited his world. Along the Mississippi Delta, where the air itself feels haunted, a deed was filed in 1852 that should have been impossible under every law of God and man. It bore the signature of a slave who owned the very plantation he once worked, and the widow of the man he murdered signed beside him as his wife. The parish clerk who wrote it in trembling ink left a note in the margin. God have mercy on us all. But mercy does not live in stories like this. It died the night Moses crossed the threshold between servant and master, between human and something far older. What he did was not rebellion, it was possession. The kind that happens when a man studies power long enough to understand how it is made, and longer still to learn how to take it. You see, history only records what it dares to explain. It tells you he rose from slavery, that he was clever, that he took advantage of circumstance. Lies. What truly happened in that house on the river was the inversion of an entire social order. Every master lives by a secret code: how to command, how to extract obedience, how to maintain hierarchy through ritual and fear. Moses learned it, broke it, and then rewrote it from within. They said his master died by suicide, but the autopsy that never reached daylight revealed something stranger. The wound too clean, the rifle angle wrong, the expression on the dead man's face one of recognition, as if he saw in his final instant the thing he had created staring back at him. The slaves who watched Moses that night said he didn't speak for hours. He just stood by the river, eyes fixed on the black water as if listening for instructions from somewhere deeper than sound. By dawn he was different, calm, untouchable. He had crossed into the current of power itself. The world thinks Moses inherited a plantation, but he inherited something far darker, the knowledge that all systems of control can be devoured from within by the one who truly understands them. Power never announces itself. It enters quietly, disguised as order, disguised as obedience. That's how Moses learned it. Born in chains, he was fed the rituals of servitude, the bow of the head, the silence after command, the patience of those who wait generations for justice that never comes. But he studied every gesture, every glance, every contradiction in the eyes of the men who ruled him. Henri Beauchamp, his master, thought himself a god on earth. Yet gods, Moses learned, bleed like any man when their own symbols turn against them. Moses had watched for years as the plantation breathed, its rhythms, its seasons, its laws of fear. He knew who carried the keys, who counted the cane, who drank too much to notice what disappeared from the ledgers. He memorized the hidden economy of sin that kept Bellerive alive. Every lie, every bribe, every betrayal. Knowledge was his rebellion. But knowledge alone doesn't grant freedom, only control does. By 1852, Moses was no longer just a slave. He was the mind behind the master's wealth. Henry consulted him on debts, on crops, on politics, trusting him as one might trust a mirror that flatters the reflection. But mirrors lie, and Moses had begun to see something in Henri's reflection that Henri could not see himself. Decay. A man grown comfortable inside his illusion of power, a man who no longer realized how easily his world could be inverted. Celeste, the widow-to-be, was the final key. A woman trapped in silk and expectation, as much a prisoner of status as Moses was of iron. She saw in him something forbidden, intelligence that dared to meet her eyes. In that meeting, history cracked. Not with love, but with recognition. Two captives of different cages seeing in each other the same hunger, to rule what once ruled them. When Henri died, the system shuddered but did not collapse. It adapted. The overseers bowed to the widow. The widow leaned on Moses, and through that chain, control flowed invisibly to the man who was never supposed to have it. He didn't seize power. He absorbed it. Piece by piece, decision by decision, signature by signature, until the line between master and slave blurred into something unrecognizable. By the time the ink dried on the deed, Moses wasn't rising, he was replacing. Every empire dies the same way, not from rebellion, but from imitation perfected. Listen closely, because most will never understand this. Power is not given. It is taken, quietly, patiently, and often without anyone noticing until it is already too late. Moses understood this better than any man alive in Ascension Parish. While Henri slept in his 3-story French colonial house, Moses walked its corridors like a shadow, silent, observing, cataloguing. Every man's weakness, every woman's fear, every child's hope was etched into his memory, stored like ammunition for the moment it would be needed. He was patient because he knew that patience was itself a weapon. The overseers, Tobias and Samuel Greenleaf, believed authority came from law, from whiteness, from tradition. Moses watched them flinch at the wrong glance, hesitate when confronted by indecision. He saw how they overcompensated, how pride made them blind. Power, he understood, was not the whip in your hand. It was the fear in their hearts, the doubts they dared not speak. And he had mastered that fear without them realizing it. Every detail of Bellerive plantation, its sugar fields, its machinery, its ledgers, was a map of opportunity. Moses memorized the currents of trade, the subtle ways the New Orleans factors could be manipulated, the debts owed, the secrets kept. Knowledge like this is invisible, yet it is the foundation of true dominion. He didn't need a title, a badge, or a law to validate him. The world bends to the man who knows more than anyone else, and he knew everything. Celeste's compliance, her eventual choice to marry him, was not affection. It was recognition. She understood the current had shifted, and that survival, even prosperity, required alignment with the force now moving through the plantation. Within 40 days of Henry's death, the boundaries of race, custom, and morality had been rewritten in the ink of necessity and fear. Those who resisted, overseers, clergy, curious neighbors, either vanished or bent. The system itself became his instrument. And here's what most miss. Moses did not kill to rule. He killed to reveal, to expose the fragility of authority, the illusions of dominance, the lies that keep empires standing. One man's death proved the falseness of all hierarchies. Bellerive had been a machine powered by obedience. He had learned to reverse its gears from within. Power, once touched, does not forgive hesitation. Those who follow his story must understand, this is not history for the faint of heart. You are peering into the blueprint of control itself, a design hidden behind law, ritual, and fear. The man who held a rifle in his lap and died thinking he ruled had already lost everything before the trigger was pulled. The night Henri Beauchamp died, Bellerive was silent in a way that the human ear cannot truly comprehend. Silence, when it is watched, becomes heavy. It presses against the walls, seeps into the floors, and settles over those who remain. Moses walked through that silence not as a man seeking to survive, but as a man who understood that survival was irrelevant. What mattered was inevitability. Every step he took in that house had already been calculated, rehearsed in the hidden corridors of his mind for years. Nothing was accidental, nothing spontaneous, nothing left to chance. Those who claim that slaves could not possess strategy, intelligence, or cunning have never walked in the shadow of someone like Moses. Henry's death was not merely the collapse of a single man. It was the exposure of a flaw so profound in the system that the overseers could feel it even before they fully understood what had occurred. Tobias Greenleaf, the senior overseer, paced in confusion, issuing orders that felt hollow even to himself. Samuel, his brother, fumed in impotent anger. They were men trained to command, yet powerless in the presence of someone whose authority was invisible, yet absolute. Moses did not declare his victory. He allowed it to emerge naturally, like a tide rising around them while they struggled to anchor themselves in sand. The household watched as he orchestrated the impossible. Celeste, the widow, saw in his eyes not passion, but inevitability, the sort that unsettles even the most rational mind. She could sense that the man before her had done what no one else dared, that he had walked across lines drawn by centuries of fear and custom, and in doing so, had rewritten the rules of reality. Those who would resist found themselves quietly, efficiently removed from the equation. Some disappeared under accidental circumstances. Others grew cautious, silent, and compliant. Bellerive, a place of order and hierarchy, now trembled on the edge of a new kind of law. A law dictated not by color, title, or creed, but by mastery of observation, timing, and psychological precision. And yet, what is most disturbing is that Moses did not take pleasure in the deaths, the fear or the bending of men to his will. He simply understood something most men cannot bear to consider. Authority is a fragile illusion, and the world will always yield to the one who understands how to move unseen beneath its surface. Every ledger, every contract, every word he wrote was an extension of that understanding. To witness him in those hours after Henri's death was to see history itself fold inward, bending to the strategy of a mind no one had truly measured. Understand this now, and carry it with you. Power is never the loudest voice, never the strongest fist. It is the quiet calculation behind every action, the patience to wait while others stumble blindly over their own assumptions. Moses did not rise. He had already been there, waiting for the world to catch up. By the time the Mississippi sun rose over Bellerive Plantation, the rules of the world had already shifted. What the outside eye saw was calm, the fields tilled, the mill operating, the household functioning as if nothing had changed. But those who knew the truth felt the tremor beneath their feet, a subtle acknowledgement that the man they had long ignored was no longer a servant. Moses moved through the estate with the quiet authority of someone who understands that control is not a momentary exertion, but a constant pressure applied invisibly. Every glance, every gesture, every spoken word carried weight they did not yet recognize. He had learned early that visibility is a trap. The Greenleaf brothers, proud and arrogant, believed authority came from being seen and heard, from issuing commands and punishing disobedience. Moses had studied them, learned their patterns, and understood that true dominance exists where it is not acknowledged, where fear and respect coalesce silently into obedience. By the time Henri's coffin was sealed in the ice house, the overseers already felt it. The unspoken power had shifted. The hierarchy they relied upon was no longer anchored in law or lineage. It rested on him. Celeste's transformation was equally telling. Within 40 days of Henri's death, she had recognized the inevitable and acted. Marriage to Moses was not an act of affection or political maneuvering in the conventional sense. It was alignment with the current of force flowing through the estate, the only recognition of power that mattered. Those who tried to question it, the curious, the ambitious, the meddling, found themselves quietly removed, their voices silenced before they could echo. Bellerive became a crucible, where the old rules melted and reformed under the pressure of one man's understanding. What makes Moses' story terrifying to this day is not just the audacity of a former slave marrying into wealth, but the methodology. He did not act recklessly, nor did he rely on brute force. He moved like a shadow through a house built on the illusion of control, observing every detail, memorizing every ledger, every schedule, every fear. The deaths that followed were not chaos. They were the natural pruning of a system unprepared for the precision of true power. He was patient because he understood time as an ally, that even the most entrenched authority can be broken with quiet, deliberate calculation. And now, take this lesson seriously. The world bends first to those who understand it, then to those who dare to shape it. Moses' rise is a warning, a blueprint, and a revelation all at once. The plantation was not merely a place of labor and hierarchy. It was a map of human ambition, vulnerability, and corruption. And he read it better than anyone else ever could. By the summer of 1852, Bellerive Plantation was no longer a simple estate. It had become a laboratory of human behavior, a place where every allegiance, every fear, every ambition was measured and manipulated. Moses did not merely inherit the property. He inherited the intricate web of dependencies, loyalties, and unspoken hierarchies that kept the plantation alive. He understood something most men never grasp. The true power in any system is invisible, lodged in the spaces between law and custom, in the whispered assumptions that everyone takes for granted. It is not the master who rules. It is the one who understands how the master is ruled, and how the observers of power are blind to the currents beneath their feet. The Greenleaf brothers, Tobias and Samuel, had spent decades believing their authority came from title and tradition. Moses saw their confidence, dissected it, and waited. He allowed them to operate under the illusion that they were in control, issuing commands that seemed unchallenged. Meanwhile, he monitored every transaction, every ledger entry, every conversation that passed behind closed doors. He knew who could be persuaded, who could be broken, and who would resist to the bitter end. And he calculated his moves with the patience of a man who had spent a lifetime watching the world unfold from shadows. Even Celeste, ostensibly a passive participant, was being guided along a current she could not name. In marrying Moses, she was not choosing love. She was acknowledging inevitability. There was a subtle exchange in her eyes, a recognition that she was aligning herself with a force she could neither command nor resist. In that quiet acquiescence, Moses achieved something extraordinary. He had not only seized control of property, but of perception itself. He had redefined who had authority and who was powerless, and he did so without the need for violence, without open confrontation. Yet what makes this story so unsettling is that it exposes a hidden truth about power and control, that the strongest dominion is psychological, unseen, and unacknowledged. When a man understands how the minds of others operate, their fears, their desires, their habits, he can bend them without ever raising a hand. Every system, no matter how rigid, has a breaking point, and Moses had spent decades quietly discovering where that point lay. He did not rush. He did not panic. He acted with cold precision, knowing that the moment would arrive when all resistance would crumble without a single overt strike. Now, pause for a moment and understand this. Those who resist recognition of hidden structures are doomed to be manipulated. You sitting there listening are part of a world built on obedience and unseen rules. To awaken to these truths is the first step toward mastery. If you understand what I'm showing you, comment twice below with the phrase, "I see the current." Listen closely, because this is where most men fail to grasp the gravity of what they are hearing. Control is never blunt. It does not shout, it whispers. It seeps into the routines, the expectations, the unquestioned assumptions of every person who believes they are free. Moses understood this better than anyone at Bellarive Plantation. He did not need a title, a whip, or a law to dominate. He wielded influence like a scalpel, cutting precisely at the weak points of human ego, fear, and desire. By the time Henri's death was officially recorded, the plantation had already shifted, its power structures quietly bowing to a mind far beyond the comprehension of those who thought themselves masters. Every interaction was calculated. Tobias and Samuel Greenleaf still thought they commanded the estate, but Moses had observed the subtle cracks in their authority, the moments of hesitation that betrayed doubt. A glance too long, a question phrased incorrectly, an order delivered with the wrong tone. These were all opportunities for him to steer outcomes without ever appearing to act. Every ledger entry, every contract, every arrangement with New Orleans factors became part of a larger, invisible strategy. He moved in silence, yet his presence dictated the actions of all who lived and worked under the shadow of Bellarive. Celeste, now his partner in name and in purpose, was a participant in a psychological architecture she would not consciously understand. Marriage in this context was not about affection. It was about legitimacy, about perception, about consolidating influence through the most subtle forms of compliance. The plantation's social hierarchy, its laws, its customs, all were tools he could manipulate. A nod here, a pause there, and the world bent in ways that appeared natural to everyone else. The true lesson of Bellarive was revealed in these quiet, almost invisible transactions. Mastery is not conquest. Mastery is orchestration, and make no mistake, the orchestration is dangerous. Those who sense it but cannot comprehend it react unpredictably. Henri's death, the rapid consolidation of power, the quiet deaths and disappearances of those who questioned him, all were part of a system he had learned to read, to manipulate, and ultimately, to control. The plantation itself was alive, and Moses was its unseen conductor. Every event, every accident, every coincidence was subject to his subtle hand. Understand this, because it is the truth that changes a man once he truly sees it. The world is not controlled by law, tradition, or force. It is controlled by knowledge, the knowledge of human patterns, weaknesses, and unspoken rules. To wield such knowledge is to step into a realm few ever reach. If you understand this, type again below, "I see the current," twice. Let the words anchor the transformation. Now, listen carefully. This is where most histories falter, where storytellers dare not go, the quiet machinery of elimination. Moses understood that removing obstacles is not about spectacle, it is about subtlety. The men who questioned him, the Greenleaf brothers, the priest who tried to intervene, the neighbors who whispered about the sudden rise of a man born into chains, all vanished or bent without the world noticing the hands that guided their fates. Death, disappearance, misfortune, these were not random. They were instruments, tuned with precision to preserve the illusion of normalcy while securing his dominion. It is tempting to imagine that such events are mere luck, chance aligned with circumstance. But there is no luck in mastery. There is calculation, observation, the recognition of patterns others refuse to acknowledge. Tobias Greenleaf's unease, Samuel's resentment, the priest's interference, all predictable, all manageable, all neutralized in ways that left the world believing itself untouched. The social order, fragile yet confident, continued to turn on its predictable axis. And yet beneath the surface it had been inverted. The real power no longer resided in tradition, in white privilege, in legal authority. It resided entirely in the mind of a former slave who had learned how to read men as easily as letters on a page. Even the widow Celeste was implicated in the subtle network of influence he wove. Her choices were guided without coercion, aligned not by fear but by recognition of inevitability. To those watching from the outside, the marriage appeared shocking, scandalous, perhaps even immoral. To Moses, it was a necessary node in a network of psychological control, proof that perception could be shaped as easily as events. The estate itself became a machine of obedience, every human action observed, recorded, and redirected in service of an invisible architecture. Moses' genius was in understanding that real power is never overt. It is the silent pressure that bends wills without visible force, the whispered recognition that resistance is futile, the subtle manipulations that erase the notion of choice before a person even realizes it. The deaths, the disappearances, the rapid consolidation of authority, all were part of a system most men fail to notice until it is too late. Here is the truth most fear to acknowledge. Control is an art form. The artist sees the hidden lines, the weak joints, the cracks in the edifice of society. He moves quietly, deliberately, and those who resist are swept aside, and often without understanding what has struck them. Moses did not simply inherit Bellarive, he inherited the ability to bend human behavior itself. The true mastery Moses wielded at Bellarive was not in wealth, land, or legal title. It was in the human mind. He had spent decades observing, cataloging, and predicting behavior. Every glance, every hesitation, every sigh carried information. He could read fear like a manuscript, desire like an open ledger, and loyalty like a contract waiting to be signed. To the untrained eye, he appeared calm, methodical, even deferential at times. But beneath that exterior, he orchestrated the lives of everyone around him with a precision that few ever recognize, let alone resist. Consider the Greenleaf brothers. Trained to oversee, to command, to punish, they believed they held authority. Moses allowed them to believe this. He let their pride run unchecked, monitored their assumptions, and waited for the moment their own flaws would betray them. A single hesitation in issuing orders, a subtle misstep in protocol, and he was ready to exploit it, not violently but psychologically. He made them doubt themselves, question their competence, and wonder why their command seemed to falter. Fear, subtle and pervasive, became a tool more effective than any whip. Celeste, the widow, was not a pawn. She was a partner in perception management. By guiding her understanding, influencing her choices without overt pressure, Moses ensured the plantation's social face remained intact. Outsiders saw compliance and propriety, while insiders recognized a subtle reconfiguration of authority. Every action she took reinforced the narrative he wanted. The illusion that Bellarive's hierarchy remained unchanged while the true locus of control had shifted. Even ordinary workers, those who once called him master, were influenced without awareness. Assignments were manipulated to test loyalty, to reward obedience, and to isolate dissent. A seemingly minor favor or reprimand carried consequences that rippled through the estate like an unseen tide. By the time resistance emerged, it was already too late. The currents of influence had aligned against the dissenter. What makes Moses' dominance terrifying is the invisibility of his methods. He did not need violence, public confrontation, or dramatic displays of force. He used perception as a weapon. Control is a quiet, persistent pressure applied to the mind, and he applied it perfectly. Fear, respect, dependence, all became tools in the architecture he built around Bellarive. Every ledger, every contract, every conversation was a brick in this psychological fortress. Understand this deeply. The world bends first to the one who understands the human mind. Knowledge of patterns, prediction of behavior, and manipulation of perception. These are the foundations of true power. And Moses had mastered them long before the world noticed he had risen. Now we enter the part that few dare to confront. The almost mythic quality of Moses' intellect, a force so precise it bordered on the uncanny. By the time he fully assumed control of Bellarive, his understanding of human behavior, economics, and law had transcended ordinary calculation. He could predict the actions of men years before they acted, anticipate weaknesses before they were revealed, and orchestrate events with a level of foresight that seemed impossible. Those who observed him closely sensed something unnatural, a presence that moved through the world as if time itself bent around him. Consider the parables hidden in the ledger books, the careful manipulation of contracts and debts. To the casual eye, they were mundane, routine records of commerce. But each line was a thread in a web of influence. Factor after factor in New Orleans, rival planters, even government clerks, all were affected by decisions that seemed innocuous, but carried consequences far beyond their comprehension. Moses did not just manage Bellarive. He managed the perceptions, the expectations, the very reality of everyone connected to it. Knowledge, in his hands, was a form of dominion. Even Henry's death, officially deemed suicide, was a stage in this invisible architecture. The narrative accepted by law and custom concealed a far deeper truth. A single life removed with subtlety can reorder the fates of dozens. Those who questioned the speed of his rise, who murmured doubts, found themselves caught in accidents, illnesses, and unexplained misfortunes. Bellarive was a theater, and he was the invisible playwright, guiding every action, every reaction, with a clarity that bordered on preternatural. Celeste's acquiescence was another instrument in this orchestration. Her marriage to Moses was the outward face of legitimacy, the illusion of continuity, while the true currents of control ran quietly beneath. Every decision she made reinforced the system he had constructed, even when she believed it was her own volition. And the enslaved and free laborers alike, the overseers, the clergy, even neighbors, all became actors in a drama whose script only he fully understood. This is the lesson hidden in plain sight. Mastery is not brute force. It is the ability to see the invisible, to manipulate the currents of thought, perception, and expectation. It is to act in ways so subtle that resistance seems futile before it is even recognized. Moses was not simply clever. He had reached a level of control that blurred the line between human intellect and something approaching inevitability itself. Understand this, and let it resonate. True dominion over men and systems is invisible. It is psychological, it is patient, and it is relentless. Moses teaches that to see the world as it truly is, and to act within it with precision, is to step into a kind of power few will ever comprehend. Now we descend into the moral shadow that most histories will not dare to illuminate. Moses' power was not without cost, nor was it entirely clean. The consolidation of authority at Bellarive was a careful orchestration of obedience, fear, and elimination, and with it came choices most men cannot bear to make. Those who questioned him, those who challenged the subtle hierarchy he had constructed, were removed from the equation, quietly, efficiently, and without public spectacle. The Greenleaf brothers learned that resistance was futile. The priest learned that intervention was meaningless, and neighbors who whispered behind closed doors found themselves abruptly silenced by misfortune. None understood that these outcomes were not accidents but instruments in a deliberate strategy. This is what makes Moses' story dangerous knowledge. He did not act impulsively, nor did he rely on the brutality expected of a man in his position. He acted with calculation, patience, and precision. Each death, disappearance, or misfortune served a dual purpose. It removed a threat while reinforcing the invisible architecture of control he had built. He understood that authority is psychological before it is physical, and that perception can be a weapon as sharp as any blade. The illusion of order, the confidence of those around him in their own competence, was carefully maintained even as he dismantled the foundations of their authority from beneath them. Celeste, the widow, became both participant and symbol. Her marriage to Moses was a necessary node in the network of legitimacy and perception. Outsiders saw propriety and continuity, while insiders witnessed a quiet revolution. She was the outward face of compliance, reinforcing the illusion of a stable hierarchy, while the real power flowed silently through the hands of the man they once considered a slave. Every choice she made, guided subtly by observation and influence, reinforced Moses' control without any overt coercion. And the workers, the laborers, the overseers, the clergy, all were caught in this architecture of influence. Assignments were shifted, favors given and withheld, subtle rewards and punishments distributed, all designed to test loyalty and bend perception. By the time any dissenter realized the nature of the control surrounding them, it was already too late. They had been woven into a system from which resistance was impossible. Here is the truth few admit: mastery is not overt. It is the patient, invisible reshaping of belief, expectation, and perception. Moses understood that better than anyone, and his rise demonstrates how a single mind, disciplined and observant, can bend an entire system without ever raising a hand. To comprehend this is to awaken to the hidden mechanics of power, a truth both intoxicating and terrifying. Now we enter the realm where power becomes almost imperceptible, a dominion not exercised through laws, contracts, or weapons, but through the mind itself. Moses' greatest skill was anticipation. He could read hesitation before it appeared, doubt before it surfaced, and desire before it was spoken. Every human action has a pattern, every reaction a predictable cadence, and he had mastered the art of seeing those rhythms, learning them, bending them to his will. Bellarive Plantation became a stage where every player performed according to his silent script, unaware that they were actors in a drama orchestrated with relentless precision. The Greenleaf brothers were perfect examples. Trained in authority but limited in vision, they moved with confidence while blind to the currents that had already begun to sweep beneath their feet. Tobias's resentment, Samuel's ambition, even their fleeting moments of suspicion, all were catalogued, timed, and redirected. Moses never confronted them directly. Instead, he let them stumble into their own mistakes, allowed them to erode their own credibility, and ensured that by the time anyone realized the subtle shift, the outcome was inevitable. This is the hidden law of mastery. Remove the illusion of choice while preserving the appearance of free will. Celeste's role was equally crucial. Her compliance, carefully cultivated, reinforced the system. But it was not mere obedience. It was perception management. To the world, she appeared as a widow who made a shocking marital choice. In reality, she became a pillar in Moses' architecture of influence, an unwitting amplifier of his invisible authority. Every word she spoke, every decision she made under his subtle guidance, reinforced the sense that the old hierarchy remained intact even as it had been irrevocably inverted. Even the laborers, the enslaved, and the clerks were caught in this web. Favor and reprimand were distributed like invisible currents, designed to test loyalty, instill subtle fear, and guide behavior without confrontation. By the time any worker questioned the logic, the momentum of the invisible system had already aligned them toward compliance. It was a dominion built on foresight, manipulation, and psychological leverage, a force so complete that it rendered physical coercion almost obsolete. Understand this: true control is invisible. The world bends first to the mind that predicts, then to the mind that shapes, and finally to the mind that orchestrates without notice. Moses did not merely rise. He became the unseen force that dictated outcomes, guided perception, and determined the fates of men and women alike. To witness his method is to confront the terrifying architecture of human domination, a lesson in the quiet, precise and terrifying mechanics of ultimate power. By the time the first harvest under Moses' rule arrived, Bellerive Plantation had transformed from a place of labor into a silent fortress of influence. The social fabric of the estate, once rigid and predictable, had been quietly rewoven. Those who resisted or questioned him either vanished, faltered, or bent to his will without knowing why. The Greenleaf brothers, once symbols of authority, now operated as extensions of his design, their pride and arrogance subtly redirected to serve his purpose. Even the priest who had attempted to intervene learned, through quiet misfortune and circumstance, that certain boundaries could not be crossed. Bellerive had become a laboratory of inevitability, and Moses was the invisible hand guiding every experiment. The deaths and disappearances that followed were never chaotic, never loud. One might have been an accident, another an illness, another a misstep that led to permanent silence. To the outside world, these events seemed natural, even tragic. But Moses understood their function. Each removal reinforced the hierarchy he had reconstructed in secrecy. Every absence created space for obedience, compliance, and fear to grow. Those who observed closely, the curious neighbors or ambitious planters, saw patterns only faintly like ripples on the water's surface, never realizing that the entire current flowed from one mind. Celeste, the widow, was both witness and instrument. Her compliance gave legitimacy to the new order, her social position reinforcing perception even as the reality beneath it had shifted completely. She had become part of the invisible architecture, her actions subtly guiding perception while Moses remained the unseen fulcrum of power. It was a partnership in domination, not love. Alignment, not affection. Together they projected an image of propriety, stability, and continuity, while the internal dynamics had been completely inverted. And what is most terrifying about this reality is that it required no displays of force. The estate operated under the illusion of normalcy, yet no one could challenge it successfully. Fear, respect, perception, all had been manipulated to perfection. Moses did not need to declare his supremacy. He had already embedded it in the minds of those who lived under his observation. Bellerive became an ecosystem of control, self-regulating, maintained not by laws or threats, but by subtle manipulation of expectation, perception, and obedience. Take this truth with you, and let it resonate. The most complete dominion is invisible. Those who understand the currents of human behavior, and who act with patience, precision, and observation, can bend entire systems without ever raising a hand. Moses did not conquer Bellerive. He orchestrated it, and in doing so, he revealed a principle hidden in plain sight. Mastery is psychological, inevitable, and terrifyingly effective. By now, you must understand, Moses' dominion did not end at the borders of Bellerive. The true scope of his control was a network, a web of influence that extended quietly into every corner of Ascension Parish and beyond. Every neighbor, every factor in New Orleans, every minor official who handled contracts or debts was observed, catalogued, and subtly guided. The world outside the plantation did not dictate events at Bellerive. Moses dictated events in the world, invisibly, through anticipation and manipulation. He had learned that power is rarely maintained through force. It is maintained through information, influence, and the quiet reshaping of expectations. Every interaction with outsiders became an exercise in psychological strategy. Rival planters who thought themselves untouchable were maneuvered into overextending, making errors that Moses had predicted years in advance. Debtors, contractors, and local officials were subtly incentivized to comply with his terms, often without realizing they were complicit in the expansion of his influence. This was not mere cleverness. It was a form of domination that few ever recognize, a manipulation of systems, perception, and ambition itself. The plantation had become both a fortress and a command center, a locus from which invisible power radiated outward, bending the currents of commerce, politics, and human behavior simultaneously. Celeste, again, was central to this orchestration. Her social connections, her presence in parish gatherings, her perceived influence among the Creole elite allowed Moses to operate behind the veil of propriety. Outsiders saw her as the bridge between worlds, yet they were unknowingly aligned with him. Every subtle endorsement, every discreet recommendation, every smile at the right moment reinforced the network he had constructed. He was the mind behind the mask, guiding perception so carefully that no one could distinguish reality from illusion. Even within Bellerive, the invisible network ensured loyalty and obedience. Tasks were assigned strategically, relationships nurtured or strained deliberately, and subtle reminders of his control dispersed like currents beneath the surface. Every human interaction became a test of alignment, a way to measure perception, obedience, and potential threat. Those who failed quietly vanished or were corrected before resistance could take root. Those who complied thrived, unknowingly reinforcing his structure. Understand this fully. Moses's power was not merely personal. It was systemic. It was the quiet orchestration of behavior, perception, and circumstance on a scale that most men cannot even recognize. The plantation, the parish, the broader web of influence, all became instruments in a structure invisible to everyone but him. To grasp this is to see the world differently, as a network of flows, patterns, and vulnerabilities waiting for the mind capable enough to bend them. Section 15 will delve into the secret calculations and contingency plans Moses employed to maintain unbroken control over Bellerive and its surrounding web of influence. At the heart of Moses's mastery was a mind that treated human behavior as a series of equations, each variable carefully observed, predicted, and manipulated. He understood that power is fragile, that systems appear solid only until someone knows precisely where to apply pressure. At Bellerive, he had mapped every dependency. Who relied on whom, which voices carried weight, which fears could be exploited, and which desires could be leveraged. He had contingency plans for every eventuality, hidden strategies that anticipated resistance, rebellion, and betrayal long before they could manifest. This was not paranoia. It was calculation, a preemptive strike against chaos in the only way that mattered, invisibly. Every ledger entry, every contract, every correspondence was part of this architecture. A payment here, a delayed shipment there, a subtle favor or reprimand, all were designed to reinforce control, test loyalty, and bend perception. The plantation operated not merely as an economic unit, but as a psychological grid, where every action of every person contributed to the stability of the system he had constructed. The Greenleaf brothers, once confident in their authority, now acted as tools, their every choice shaped by subtle influence. Even small mistakes, such as a misread ledger or a delayed report, became opportunities for adjustment and control, lessons embedded in the behavior of those who believed themselves free agents. Celeste's role, once again, was crucial. She became the public face of the estate's stability, her apparent autonomy masking the subtle guidance Moses imposed. Her interactions with neighbors, her decisions at social gatherings, even her private behavior, all were instruments in the architecture of dominance. To the outside world, Bellerive appeared orderly, proper, and compliant with tradition. Yet beneath this surface, every contingency had been anticipated. Every challenge, every threat had a countermeasure prepared, ready to be deployed without revealing the hand that had orchestrated it. This is the terrifying brilliance of Moses. He understood that true control requires invisibility. Force is crude, authority is fragile, law is mutable, but perception is permanent. By shaping what people believed, guiding what they feared, and predicting what they desired, he constructed a dominion that could not be overtly challenged. Every misstep was accounted for, every potential rebellion neutralized before it could begin. Bellerive was no longer just a plantation. It was a living mechanism of psychological control, a testament to what a single mind can accomplish when it perceives human systems with precision and acts with patience, foresight, and relentless subtlety. Here we confront the moral shadow that underpins all true mastery. Moses' dominion over Bellerive was not just mechanical, it was ethical in its own hidden logic, a system of unspoken rules that governed loyalty, compliance, and the consequences of resistance. Those who lived under him learned quickly that the boundaries of safety were invisible and shifting, dictated not by law or tradition, but by the subtle pressures he applied. In this ecosystem of control, morality was transactional. Survival depended on perception, and obedience was measured not by commands, but by the alignment of thought. Every action he took was calculated to maintain the delicate equilibrium between fear and respect. He never needed to lash, threaten, or enforce authority with brute force. The psychological architecture he built ensured compliance before rebellion could emerge. The Greenleaf brothers understood this instinctively, even if they could not articulate it. Their pride and resentment became predictable levers. A word here, a pause there, a carefully timed oversight. Each intervention tested boundaries and subtly redirected behavior. Moses had codified his own system of consequences. Minor disobedience was corrected subtly, persistent dissent eliminated quietly. The plantation itself enforced the rules, and the consequences were always precise, almost surgical in their execution. Celeste's role, too, was governed by this invisible code. Her compliance, her alignment with perception, and her reinforcement of appearances ensured the stability of the system. She became a necessary conduit, a visible confirmation that the order of Bellarive remained intact. Outsiders never perceived the deeper structure. They only saw propriety, legitimacy, and continuity. Yet, behind the curtain, every choice she made, every recommendation she offered, every interaction with neighbors reinforced the architecture Moses had built. She had unwittingly become both instrument and witness to the silent assertion of authority. Even the laborers, overseers, and minor officials were bound by this hidden ethic. Tests of loyalty, subtle manipulations of expectation, and calibrated rewards ensured compliance. Fear was never blunt. It was anticipatory. Respect was never demanded. It was quietly earned through demonstration of competence and foresight. Those who violated the invisible rules paid the price before they even realized the offense. This was the quiet terror of mastery. It is not visible, yet its effects are absolute. Understand this fully. The unspoken code of control is more powerful than any law, weapon, or title. It governs the mind, shapes perception, and dictates outcomes with precision. Moses' genius lay not only in his ability to anticipate behavior, but in his understanding that morality itself could be leveraged as a tool, a framework for obedience, and a weapon against dissent. To see this is to confront a truth few dare to acknowledge. Real power is invisible, systemic and morally unbound. By this point, the scope of Moses' influence had quietly expanded far beyond the borders of Bellarive. The estate was no longer merely a plantation. It had become the nucleus of a network that extended through Ascension Parish and into neighboring properties. Every factor, every neighboring planter, every minor official and merchant was an instrument in a larger architecture of influence. Moses understood that domination does not reside solely within walls or titles. It resides in perception, in expectation, and in the subtle shaping of circumstance. By the time his influence was noticed, it was already too late to resist. Neighbors who once viewed Bellarive as a peer in competition now found themselves subtly guided into alignment with Moses' interests. Contracts were renegotiated without confrontation, debts and favors carefully timed to ensure compliance, and alliances quietly shifted in his favor. This was not intimidation. It was anticipation. He knew exactly who could be persuaded, who could be manipulated, and who posed a threat that required careful neutralization. Every meeting, every social event, every transaction became a vector for influence, a chance to bend reality subtly toward his design. Even the broader parish was subject to his invisible hand. Clergy, merchants, and minor officials all assumed their roles with autonomy, yet Moses' unseen calculations had already anticipated their decisions. A favor here, a subtle reminder there, and the world moved exactly as he had foreseen. Bellarive was a hub, but its power radiated outward like ripples in a pond, imperceptible yet undeniable. He had created a system in which resistance became almost inconceivable. Those who attempted it were either quietly removed or steered into compliance before dissent could take root. Celeste, Once a widow whose influence seemed limited to propriety and social standing, now became an amplifier of Moses's reach. Her visibility in society gave legitimacy to decisions, reinforced perceptions, and masked the depth of the manipulation occurring beneath the surface. She was a symbol, a public confirmation that the old hierarchies remained intact, while the true control flowed invisibly through the actions of one man. Every handshake, every recommendation, every conversation in the parish was quietly shaped by this invisible calculus. This is the lesson embedded in Moses's quiet expansion of influence. Power is not in titles, force, or visible authority. It is in anticipation, in shaping perception, and in orchestrating outcomes before others even recognize the game. Those who master this art can bend entire systems, networks, and communities without ever drawing attention to themselves. Bellarive had become the proof. A single mind, disciplined, patient, and relentless, could extend dominion across territory, perception, and human will, leaving no one capable of resisting. Now we arrive at the final phase of Moses's consolidation, the entrenchment of authority so complete that it became inseparable from the very fabric of Bellarive and the surrounding parish. By this point, fear, respect, and dependence had fused into a singular force. Those who lived under his influence could no longer distinguish between obedience and survival, between choice and inevitability. Every action, every thought, every word was subtly guided, and even the faintest resistance was met with consequences so quiet, so precise, that the lesson was absorbed before the lesson giver was seen. This is the pinnacle of psychological mastery, a dominion so pervasive that it shapes reality itself. The Greenleaf brothers, once the proud overseers, had become instruments of compliance. Their authority remained nominal, but in practice, they enforced the invisible rules Moses had designed. Any deviation was anticipated, any complaint neutralized through subtle pressure, carefully timed correction, or circumstance manipulated to ensure alignment. Even the small clerical errors, the hesitations in conversation, the unnoticed missteps, all were opportunities to reinforce obedience. Each human interaction became a test, a metric of loyalty, and a lesson in power without visible enforcement. Celeste's presence, now inseparable from the system of control, reinforced the illusion of propriety. Her choices, her social visibility, her perceived influence among the Creole elite all served as camouflage for the depth of Moses's authority. Outsiders continued to perceive stability and legitimacy, while internally, every decision and action reinforced the architecture of psychological domination he had built. Every smile, every word, every handshake was a node in an invisible network of power, quietly reinforcing control and compliance. Even laborers, minor officials, and clergy were conditioned to act predictably. Subtle rewards and reprimands, carefully timed interventions, and the perception of inevitability shaped behavior before anyone realized they were being guided. Resistance was rendered almost impossible because the rules of the system were invisible and the consequences preemptive. In this way, Moses's authority became absolute, not through law, not through threat, but through the patient, relentless shaping of perception and expectation. Understand this. The most terrifying form of power is invisible, complete, and unassailable. When mastery reaches this level, it leaves no mark on the surface, yet penetrates every thought, every action, and every expectation. Bellarive became more than a plantation. It became a living testament to the mechanics of dominance, a demonstration of how one disciplined mind, armed with foresight and subtlety, can impose its will across human networks without ever being overtly seen. Now we step into the aftermath, the echoes of Moses' dominion that linger long after his presence became legend. Bellarive did not simply operate under his influence. It had been transformed into a psychological landscape, a blueprint for control that persisted even as time advanced. The people who lived under him, the families who depended on his guidance, and the neighbors who whispered about the sudden rise of a man born into chains, all carried the imprint of his invisible authority. Fear, respect, and anticipation had been internalized. Even decades later, the memory of Bellarive's hierarchy shaped behavior in subtle, almost unconscious ways. Moses' method of control left traces not in law books or public records, but in the collective perception of those who survived the system. Generations remembered his calm decisiveness, his uncanny ability to anticipate outcomes, and the quiet but absolute influence he exercised over every decision. Children of laborers grew up learning caution, understanding that some forces operated beyond comprehension, that obedience was sometimes survival, and that perception itself could be weaponized. The Greenleaf brothers' descendants and those of other overseers carried the residual awareness of limits, boundaries they never fully understood, and an instinctive deference to patterns they could not explain. Even the myths of Bellarive were shaped by his presence. Stories circulated in hushed tones of a man who understood the currents of thought before they appeared, of decisions that seemed miraculous, of disappearances and misfortunes that followed questioning or resistance. Outsiders attributed his rise to luck, ambition, or divine favor, but those who had lived within his system recognized a deeper, more terrifying truth. Moses had demonstrated that a single disciplined mind, observing, anticipating, and shaping human behavior, could bend an entire community to its will, without overt force. Celeste's legacy intertwined with his. Her compliance, guidance, and social authority became part of the enduring illusion of propriety, reinforcing the perception that the hierarchy was natural, justified, and immutable. She became a symbol of the system he constructed, a living confirmation that stability could exist even when the true power flowed invisibly elsewhere. Her choices, shaped subtly by observation and influence, continued to guide perception long after his death. This is the final lesson of Moses' life. Mastery leaves invisible marks. Influence that cannot be measured by law, wealth, or public acclaim persists because it shapes perception, molds behavior, and alters expectations. Bellarive was not just a plantation. It became a case study in human domination, a living record of how one man could quietly bend the currents of fear, respect, and obedience across generations. The true terror of Moses lies not in his actions, but in the enduring, invisible echoes of his control. Section 20 will conclude with the symbolic awakening for the viewer, the lesson. Moses imparts about unseen power and the mechanics of influence that exist in every system of human behavior. Now, as we reach the final threshold, consider the lesson Moses leaves for those who truly see. His story is not merely historical. It is a blueprint for understanding power in its most subtle, most terrifying form. Bellarive, the plantation, the parish, the network of influence, all of it is a mirror, reflecting the mechanics of control that operate in every human system. Wealth, titles, and laws are fragile. Influence, perception, and anticipation are permanent. Those who grasp this understand why Moses, a man born into chains, could orchestrate outcomes that eluded the educated, the wealthy, and the powerful. The invisible systems he built relied on observation, subtle manipulation, and the patient orchestration of consequences. Every person, every interaction, every minor event was catalogued and leveraged. The Greenleaf brothers, neighbors, laborers, even clergy. All were part of a living web, responding to pressures they barely perceived. Moses' genius was his patience. He did not need to act hastily. He waited, observed, and let the currents of human desire and fear flow into positions of predictability. Then, when the moment arrived, he applied influence with the precision of a master strategist, bending outcomes without revealing the force behind them. And now, a symbolic step awaits you. To internalize this knowledge, to acknowledge the invisible architecture of power in your own world, I ask you to do something simple but profound. Write in the comments twice the phrase, "I see the currents." This is more than engagement. It is a declaration, a recognition that systems, influence, and unseen forces exist in every corner of life. It is a small act of initiation into the awareness that Moses' story seeks to awaken. Mastery begins with perception. Consider the moral ambiguity as well. Moses' rise was facilitated by calculation, manipulation, and the silent removal of threats. It is a story of survival and intellect, but also of quiet terror. His world teaches that power is never neutral. It is always shaped by the mind that wields it. Those who understand this, who study it, who observe it, gain insight into the invisible levers that guide human behavior. And by understanding, they gain the potential to bend systems themselves. Finally, remember this: the most complete dominion is invisible, systemic, and anticipatory. Moses did not conquer through force. He conquered through understanding. And this is the lesson left for you. Observe, anticipate, influence, and understand the currents that shape perception. To see them is the first step toward mastery. To bend them is the ultimate. This is Moses' enduring gift, the revelation that power is subtle, patient, and invisible, and that the mind capable of seeing it becomes, inevitably, the force that shapes reality itself.